Yesterday morning's Assembly meeting started with the introduction of the Appropriation Bill and budget estimates for 2012-2013. Honourable Premier continued in his statement government's plans to continue development and the achievements acknowledged thus far. Premier Talangi said he is pleased with the continuing efforts to also increase the capacity of the new National Strategic Plan. Government's planned changes for public sector transformation and other focused areas. Premier Talangi said the key initiatives and structures have started and government will continue to encourage developments for the island and the funds needed to accomplish those changes. The Appropriation Bill and budget estimates for 2012-2013 was passed in its first reading before voted to be sent to the Bills Committee. Today we caught up with Honourable Premier on his thoughts of yesterday's discussions.
I was very happy and I was very pleased with the discussions that took place. As I said, I respect the views and opinions that are being provided by members of the House to me in our discussions on the budget principles of whether it was a good budget or bad budget and so on. The point that was made about population is very true. The fact is, what are we doing about our population? But as I said in my explanation at the end of the meeting, what exactly do we do with population? We can't just continue to say population, population, population. What are we doing about it? The manifestation of, or translation of the population Halawaka Gemuruina vision that we have is to determine what we do offer apart from what is already provided by us for our people. Power, water, schools, health services, airport, port, and so on, are things that we now provide that people expect to get without question. They don't see necessarily that is something that is provided by the government. They feel that is part and parcel of the reasons why they want to stay here, because those things are reliable and with communications at the present moment with the new services, for example, texting anywhere overseas is something that a lot of people are now starting to pick up and starting to realize I can communicate with anybody overseas via text or via cell phone calls and so on. Those are the things that add to the quality of life that we have here. But those are expected. What other things are we looking at? We're looking at improve the life and quality of life through wages increases and so on, through the business prospects that we are giving people, through the private sector and so on. So why are we talking about tourism increases, tourism accommodation increases? Why are we talking about construction of primary school and so on? These are all to do with the fact that that's part of what we offer people. The other thing that I was also thinking last night after reflecting was the fact that when people leave this place, they leave because they want to see more opportunities. That's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of them. We're now trying to say to them, here are some of the opportunities that are available here for you if you wish to come back. So that when you come back, you've got these things that are happening. You can go into construction, you can go into tourism industry servicing and so on. I travel and I stay in Auckland sometimes in hotels and so on. And some of the people that service those hotels are new ones and they're quite happy to do that. Will they come back here? I'm not sure. But I hope they do, because they do have qualities that we want to enable them to come back and work in the industry here. So those are the sort of things that I need to reflect on. Population, when you talk about population, many people talk to me about the fact that all they want is a bit of a pay increase. You tell me that. When I ask you say, well, I want my pay to go up. Well, fair enough. We've given you that, $1.5 million worth. Now, $1.5 million worth to many people is just a pay increase. What are the consequences of that? The consequences of that is that money is spent by people, with people in the private sector, in the marketplace, in the thing. The more money you get, the more disposable income you get, the more you tend to go out and spend rather than cook your own food sometimes. So that's, if you like, the manifestation, translation of what we mean by Halawaka Gemuruina, relating it back to what we're trying to do with with encouraging our people to stay and encouraging those overseas to come because of the way that we are providing for our people who are staying here.
A decision was also asked in the House of Assembly yesterday by Honourable Premier for the finalisation of the bill to be reached by the end of June. An immigration case that will see one man return to his country of origin has brought much interest and concerns from the public. The man, who has been in Niue for a few years and represents Niue in sports internationally, is about to depart the island next Friday as Cabinet made a decision on his current immigration status. Immigration Minister Honourable Toke Talangi said the decision to ask the person to leave is difficult, but there needs to be clarifications and established agreements between sponsors and those they sponsor.
The arrangements that were made with respect to the sponsor and the sponsor person were made by the Chief Immigration Officer. The reports that were submitted by him to me, in fact, was the basis upon which I made my decisions.
Now, some of the and the public, I guess, the concerns is that this is a particular interest to the Cabinet because one of the members of Parliament is the sponsor for this person who's leaving next week.
As I explained to you, this is not the only case that we looked at as part of the number of people who were caught in between, if you like, when the new Act was passed and enacted, if you wish. There were others. And when we were looking at the number of people, I think there were 15 or 20 people involved, we couldn't figure out, because we couldn't tell whether, because they've shifted the sponsorships for one person in the next instance from the original sponsor. So I said to the Chief Immigration Officer, look, this is too messy. We need to go back, all of them, to the original sponsors and determine, because that's the only legal basis that we had for determining whether these people will agree or not to stay. It was difficult for us to determine whether there was a legally binding agreement between the new sponsor or the new sponsor, because some of these people were 2 or 3 sponsors down the track. So I said, go back to the original, because that's the only way that we can determine, if you like, whether that person has a right to things. So this person here fell into the same category, and he and his sponsor were the only people who in fact disagreed out of all of those other people that we had thing. So it wasn't a question, and I know some people said to me, is it because he was a thing? And the chief said to me, is that the reason? I said, Chief, you understand that this is not an isolated case. This is a case which included all the other cases. Unfortunately, it was the only case that didn't involve agreement between the two parties. And that's the decision that was taken. And the only decision I could take was to unfortunately send the person back.
Premier Talangi also said there must be a guarantee of an agreement in place to ensure no conflict happens between the two parties, and he also gave advice to those thinking of being a sponsor.
What we're trying to do at the present moment is to provide certainty for both the sponsor and the sponsored person. And this is the problem that I found with this. And I mean, it's all hearsay. The sponsor said this, the sponsored person said this. And I said, well, there is no binding agreement or no agreement as to the terms. So what we need to do is to ensure that is put in place. So the sponsored person understands his obligations legally, and the sponsored person understands that legally as well. It protects both of them. The way the system is operating at the present moment for all of the people who have been here in the past has been too, if you like, loose. And what we need to do is to ensure that people are protected with a legally binding agreement, and that's what we intend to do.
The young man involved did not wish to speak to BCN News, but will depart Niue next Friday. A decision was reached last week by the Niue Kilikiki Federation after the Women's Executive Committee voted to agree on cricket rematches for cancelled games in the first round of the women's competition due to rain. The Women's Cricket Council was told last week by the Women's Executive another decision was reached by the Federation for the 4 unfinished matches to draw and each to receive appropriate points. However, there are still concerns from some teams who want to continue the unfinished games and was told by the executive to write and voice their views. Unfortunately, there is no clear indication at present as to where the final decision will lie. This afternoon, the Women's Council and the Niue Kilikiki Federation met to review the cricket rules for clarifications and amendments. The third round of cricket games will continue this Saturday. Niue Health and SPC are evaluating the impact of a series of HIV and STI awareness support programs currently being implemented on the island, with a monitoring and reporting workshop held this week. Niue is amongst 14 countries that received funds from the Pacific Islands Response Fund that has about 28 million Australian dollars funded by AusAid towards HIV and STI awareness support programs. Niue receives an allocation of 120,000 Australian dollars specifically to raise awareness on HIV and STIs, with 75% of those funds going to the Niue Health Department work. The remaining 30,000 is divided amongst community-based projects grant support. 6 local community groups received funding last year to implement a project, and it's now time to get pointers on reporting back on progress to date. Sala Tamani is from the SPC Grants Management Unit, who manages the Pacific Island Response Fund, here this week to monitor progress.
My trip this time is really a monitoring trip. We're looking at how the grants are going, and also just to work with the recipients on their reports, the programmatic and financial reports, as well as just collectively with the Department of Health find ways in terms of going forward, and just to see how we can best use the resources that are available to support the national HIV and STI response.
What are some of the challenges that some of the groups have indicated that has, maybe slowed down progress?
That's actually a good one, because one thing we've noted is a lot of the projects have delayed in their implementation, and the grants are performance-based and they're bound by a timeline. So we have agreements for some of them that have now lapsed, although the actual programs have not completed. So that's something that we were discussing yesterday, and today we're also in the communities just trying to find out why the projects haven't been implemented as they were planned to be implemented. There's a few issues there. The key people in the projects have also multiple roles, and so they're here, or they're off island, or they're on medical leave, and so that's affected the program. So we're trying to promote where we get a group of people from one community to be part of the program. So when one leaves, you have others that can pick it up. The other thing also that we're also finding out is sometimes the proposals were developed by someone else and they're expected to be implemented by someone else.
Despite these challenges, the monitoring and reporting workshops this week will gauge whether the work in the communities has had an impact.
A part of our work this time is how do we actually know that our work in the community is impacting the participants or the recipients, and how does that translate to people actually accessing services? It's been fairly slow. It's quite difficult to see. Tomorrow we're actually starting a session on M&E, and we're using a tool that's called Most Significant Change. So with the participants, we're going to go into the communities, to those who have already accessed the programs, and actually engage them in MSc, just to get a little bit more of how effective has the programs been. So that's also part of this mission. At the end of that, we should be able to have some impact stories for you.
Niue currently has no reported HIV cases on the island, and low numbers of STI means the focus is to keep those levels of infections down and to ensure that services are assessed and user-friendly. Second Sunday of May annually is a celebration of what is known on the island as White Sunday and Mother's Day. And with the theme involving most Ecclesia Christiana parishes around the island, youth and young parishioner express their well-versed sermons and stories depicting Christian life. For many years, Ecclesia Christiana Niue encouraged the involvement of whole families, and it continued, but with a reduction in numbers. Each parish contained their own translations of what activities best suit their congregation, and Sunday all children celebrated with their families, and a long-lived tradition on the island. And to end our news bulletin for tonight, Makefu delivered on their promise of a good day out for the family with their annual show day on Saturday. Despite a decent downpour overnight and in the early hours of the morning, the weather cleared up just in time as the early birds made their way to buy food. The turnout was great and the food stores were plentiful, as were the handicrafts and agricultural produce. Some of the fun activities included basket weaving competition for the ladies and the sika throwing competition for the men. A point of difference from other show days is that Makefu hosts the only coconut crab race that was won by a visitor to the island, but made for great entertainment. The Binyamina ladies entertained the crowds, showcasing their ukulele skills that they have had tutoring for a few weeks, and the hard work paid off. Makefu Show Day was a major success, especially for those who won the various raffle prizes on the day. Many are already looking forward to future shows, days that give families an excuse to get out and socialize. That's our news bulletin for tonight. Good evening.